All right, welcome to Exceptional Circumstances for Exceptional Learners. I am your host tonight, Rebecca Muller, fellow special education teacher and advocate. Very excited to be joined today with Dr. Yulika Foreman. And we're going to be talking about putting the I back into IEP. The I meaning individualized. We are approaching IEP season. I know it is on the forefront of my mind. I am preparing for a weekend of IEP goal writing. And I really love the perspective of professionals who not only work from the education side, but also see it from a parent's perspective. So I'm excited to talk to her today. Just some points of business. We have amazing guests every Wednesday. I'll give you a little hint since you're here today. It's the same link each week. So if you are enjoying this, please join us. Next week, we are going to be joined with Savannah Flakes. She is a international inclusion consultant who just published a book called Shaking Up Special Education. I'm looking forward to a very energetic night as she discusses what she has learned traveling the world. And at the end of the month, on February 24th, we are joined by Julie Swanson, who considers herself the life skills lady, dealing with all things for students on the autism spectrum. So please join us. We welcome you. But without any further ado, I want to introduce you to the expert ally. I found Yulika from LinkedIn and then was incredibly impressed by her Instagram page. If you don't follow her yet, tonight you are going to, and you're going to love all the work that she has done to really educate the public and to help connect the community of people with autism as well as other disabilities. So Yulika is a special education consultant, an advocate, a clinician, and also has a background in developmental psychology. She deals with adults with autism and ADHD, as well as other conditions. She has her PhD in child development from Tufts University and a master's in mental health and vocational rehabilitation counseling from the University of Southern Florida. She is coming to us tonight from the Boston area. She is a mother of 3 kids and 2 cats, which I had the chance to meet last week. And I think the thing that drew me to her the most is that she believes that an IEP needs to make sense clinically, developmentally, and legally. And I'm curious to have a conversation to kind of see, do we think all of those things are met at all times? And if they're not, what can we do as professionals to make sure that that is something that is occurring? So without any further ado, let's bring the floor to Yulika. And I would love for you just to tell us a little bit more about your background and how you became the expert ally.
Sure. I thank you for introducing me. It's Yulika, just my name is
Oh,
Yulika.
I'm so
It's
sorry.
okay. It's all right. It's very hard in English to say it the right way. So I just wanted to mention it. So, in terms of my background, I'll say first, I'm very happy to be here and thank you for having me. And I'm a special education advocate for a lot of what I do in my practice, and so I sit at the table with speech and language pathologists and occupational therapists and school psychologists all the time in IEP meetings. And it is so great to be able to have that, to be able to speak to you today and hopefully have a good conversation outside of an IEP meeting setting, because I'm always I have my perspective as someone who represents families, not in the legal sense, but comes, to help families. And I always realize there's so many constraints and issues on the other side, but I don't always know. And it's certainly helpful, I think, to understand that for two sides to work well together and to collaborate. So, with that said, my background, I mean, there's a lot that I can say, but, in terms of what I do, Rebecca has already introduced me. And so it's special education advocacy, I do consultation, um, nationwide. I work with adults as a coach who have autism or who are autistic. And what I think I bring to my work that is helpful is, first of all, a PhD in developmental psychology, which I think is so important, in terms of just seeing, a developing human being and thinking about where that person has been and where that person is and where this person wants to go, and sort of having that long-term trajectory in mind. Um, my, I guess, personal philosophy is that I always look at the child. I think that looking at the whole person, I mean, a lot of people say that and a lot of people have that perspective, but to me it's very important not to just think about, even when I'm working on the IEP, not to just think about the challenges and the deficits and the issues, that we are trying to address, and I never think about it in terms of fixing them, but to address, to help the child with, but also look at the whole child. And what are the strengths, what are the fun things about this kid, and what do they like to do, um, and looking at the child also as a developing person, because sometimes when I see that sit at IEP, meeting tables, we talk about some behaviors and or some things that the kids do, and I have to say, look, you're talking about 14-year-old. Like, this is not autism. This is not a disability. This is not an issue related to a disability. This is just a developmental issue. Like, this is a kid, and so you are seeing these behaviors, and they're developmentally appropriate. So I think I bring that, I bring a clinical background, a family systems orientation to my work.
Mhm.
And I think it helps me in meetings, because sometimes meetings can be tense, and I can sort of use my clinical background to calm everything down and say, okay. And I also bring a very collaborative approach to my work, which is, I firmly believe that everyone around the table has good intentions, and we can collaborate and we can have a conversation, and that everyone has something to bring to the table, expertise. So I expect to learn in IEP meetings from the teams, and I do. So that's about my background. And the way I came to it is like through a lot of different educations and jobs, and then I had my kids, and then I said, okay, I was home for 3 years. I said, what am I going to do now? I'm not going to go back in academia. I don't want to be a clinician because of the requirements, scheduling would be very difficult. And so I've learned about the special education advocacy, and it seemed to just bring together a lot of my skills, and that's the way
Yeah,
I went.
absolutely. And so when we're talking about the individual, it's funny, we're talking about one person, but you just talked about having a clinician, an
Yeah.
advocate, a teacher, the family, right? So, how can we bring all of these people together with this one person in mind and really have it be productive?
Right. That's a very good question. I mean, I think there are all kinds of situations, right? So um I'm going to talk about the situation where there is a good conversation and a good relationship between a team and a family, because when there isn't, there are some additional issues. I'm in the state of Massachusetts, and so I don't know if that's typical or not, but what I really love about our meetings in the state of Massachusetts is that the first thing that happens in a meeting is the team will ask the parents to share their concerns and give an update. And I think that this is one of the ways to bring the individual into the situation, is to let the parents speak about their own child and share share their perspective, share their priorities, share their views of their child. It's a little bit tricky, I think, what you are asking, because the meetings, they're limited for time. So you have to have a good balance between, sharing those anecdotes and observations and actually being able to accomplish what you are there for.
Right.
But I think speaking to parents is one way, and then sharing with parents the observations. I think parents appreciate it so much when teachers and therapists share little anecdotes. This is what happened 2 days ago. I told you child X and he said Y, and it was just so funny, or this was so cute, or this was so great. Sharing some work. I think ongoing communication is very important. I mean, I
Absolutely.
sometimes write it into the IEP if I have to, but I think it's so much better if you could just, like, it's called homeschool communication. It's an accommodation. You can put it in additional information. But if there is a way for the family and the teacher to work out where they can communicate in a way that's manageable for the teacher, and then the family would feel supported and connected, I think that is also ideal.
Absolutely. I mean, so one of the things that I think is so important is that while the IEP meeting is happens once a year, that's the legal part.
Yeah.
But at any time, I think it's important that the families know that if something is coming up, for example, with COVID and remote learning and all of these different things, there was so much that we couldn't account for. So it's important to know that the conversation, the IEP itself, is a living, breathing document. It's not just something that we tap in April and then we're not going to talk again until the next year. And sometimes I think that is what happens just because life gets in the way and we know that that's the requirements. But every case needs to be seen on a case by case basis. Um, and so thinking about that, I like the idea of, really bringing the kid into the meeting and making them a living, breathing person too, because how many times have we been in a meeting and it's just reading off data and the numbers to the point where I can see the parents kind of gloss over because they're imagining their child as average, below, above, right? Bringing in that human part is so important. Um, which comes to, what are the things that we need to look at the most in the IEP? Is it the data? Is it the goals? Is it what the future holds? How do we make this meeting that is a short amount of time about the individual and include all of that, right? It's a lot. And I think a lot of times families feel intimidated because it is so much. So I guess the question then is, you know, how can you personalize the document, but also the experience?
Right. So there's a lot in what you have said, and I'm not sure I can, sort of hold all of it in my tired mind. Um, one thing I wanted to say is that a lot of times teams change. Teams change sometimes, with a new school year, sometimes even mid-year. And sometimes parents come to a team meeting and they don't really know a lot of people because the people are new. And sometimes people who speak on behalf of the school don't really know the child very well. And I think this is actually very, very important because there is a huge trust issue, especially when there's a determination of eligibility and you have people who have evaluated the child and who are speaking on whether or not the child is eligible, who don't really know the child. Sometimes there's an administrator in the meeting who has never met a child, who will, be speaking to parents with great conviction about their kid, whether or not that child requires special education. And I think, as I'm speaking to you who are on the school side of it. I think I'm not sure that the school teams always have that perspective on how parents come to these meetings and they go, oh my gosh, not again. We don't really know anyone. This is our sixth or seventh team chair and we're just starting all over again. So just to keep that in mind, parents don't come with implicit trust. That trust gets built and created. And when there's no continuity, it's just hard to get there. So I think, again, hearing the parents' perspective and actively seeking it out is very helpful. What you said, homeschool communication, meeting with parents, even possibly, having some meetings throughout the year just to update, maybe not full meetings, is very helpful. In terms of, what do you think most with the IEP? I mean, I can sort of take you through the process that I go through as an advocate.
Mhm.
It might be different, because I think about all areas. I don't just think about speech and language pathology or just about occupational therapy. But when I think, an annual meeting is coming up, one annual review, first thing I want to find out is, did the child meet all their objectives for the previous year? Because that's going to tell me something. We made a good guess a year ago about how this child is going to do. So have they gotten there? And if they have, that's great. And if they haven't, then talking about why did that happen? Are we not delivering services intensely enough? Is it not often enough? Is it not in the right setting? Should it not be in a classroom? Should it be out of the classroom or the other way around? Are we focusing on the right things? Do we have the right methodology? Is this the right placement? I mean, you can go a lot of places with that, but this is the first thing I usually sort of want to make sure that gets covered in a meeting. And it gives us an idea of where the child is starting from, right, with a new IEP. And
So
yeah, go ahead.
how has the conversation changed or adapted due to remote learning?
Well, it's the same conversation. I just think that there are more considerations now because last year a lot of children didn't hit their, they didn't meet their objectives, they didn't meet their goals. So, if in the past we would be more thinking about how to change the program, I think now would be thinking about what happened for this child, how far has this child come, are
Mhm.
there things in place for this child now to continue to make progress? In the state of Massachusetts, we actually have a requirement for compensatory services as well due to COVID. I don't know if that's the case in all the states. And, I think now is actually the golden age for homeschool communication. So, increasing that and thinking about how families can support the learning now for children who are in a hybrid model or a full remote model, and how there can be a lot of consultation and a lot of keeping in touch and a lot of feedback. And it's as individualized as it gets because I think that people who work for the school now have to find out what's happening in a family's home, who's working, who's not working, who's available to support the child. What is the environment like? Are there any, five other children sitting in the same room? Or does the child have a space that's their own, that's not noisy? So I think this is how it's changed,
Yeah.
that part of it. And I think, as an advocate, the next steps for me haven't changed so much, which is I will always go and look at the most recent evaluations for this child that I have available. And I would always recommend that the team do the same. I don't know if that happens in schools, but for me, it's sort of the best source of information about where the child's strengths are and challenges, what the profile like. A lot of times I remember those evaluations, but I imagine that as a school person, you probably wouldn't. And so getting updates from everyone hasn't changed. I think that is such a valuable piece because what is in evaluations, in the progress reports, when a team speaks, that is really brings it alive. But also when the parents speak, because the school is responsible for generalization of skills. So if that is an issue, if skills are not generalizing to home and community, then the school has to take that into consideration. That has not changed. And this is an important piece that needs to be looked at and an important way to individualize experience because I think as professionals, sometimes we think there is a right way, like there are right things to work on, there are the right approaches, the right priorities. um, However, it's not set in stone, and it depends on your philosophy and your approach. And for parents, it depends a lot of times on their values and what's important to them as a family, what's on their plate as a family. So if we can listen to that and respect that, and put that into an IEP, we're going to individualize their process. So as we're thinking about goals and objectives, having really considering the parents' input and
Absolutely.
respecting it is very important.
Yeah, and I also think, you talked about transparency. It doesn't get more transparent than when you're actually coming to them live from the house. And I think that so much of what we're seeing, or what I've heard, is that some parents weren't maybe as aware as the teachers thought that they were communicating. The communication could have been better, and that the parents were not aware as to what those deficits actually look like in action. So what's interesting is, how is this going to help us change the way we do things? Is it going to? Because I think the parent is such an essential part. Like, I can just speak to my own experience, but my son is in early intervention, and his intervention prior to COVID, a therapist would come to the home or to the daycare, and I would get reports. But it was much different when I was the one that had to be next to him doing what the therapist would do, as they told me what to do from the screen. And so they became more of a parent coach, and it really helped me to see where his deficits were, what he's doing well in. And it's not that they weren't reflecting that in the reports or trying to hide that. It's just a different feeling when you're with the kid and you're seeing
Right.
the frustration, or seeing, you know, the push back. And then for a parent too, it's super emotional, because you want your kid to be successful. You want them to do well. And when they're not, oh, there's that guilt. Oh, the mom guilt, right? I could be doing more. I should just quit my job and do speech with him every day. And for some, depending on the deficits, that's been a reality.
Right.
There are
Yeah.
people that have had to say, hey, like, I need to focus. Or for some, they wish that it could be, but financially they can't. And so that's where the school kind of comes in, and where you would hope that it's like, okay, like, how can we game plan this together? But there are these, restrictions sometimes, or it feels as though there are, and everybody's kind of so unsure
Oh,
where to go, right? Like, we can't quite go to the home because of the COVID stuff. We probably like should. I know there's been reports of teachers and doing lessons from the sidewalk. And it's one of those things. I love that you come with it with the approach that everybody is there because they have good intentions and they want to make a difference. Because why would we do the work that we do if we didn't, right? But it's when there's assumptions, or people are not sure, or the mission is not clear, right? I think that is one of the most crucial things. And, there's going to be some cases that that 1 year, the meeting, things go well, there's trust, it works out. But that's not, I think that's where the individualized part really comes in. You need to know not just the kid, the family, the background, the whole picture. That sometimes we lose when we get into the document. um
I think it's a hard balance. One thing I want to say is that it is very hard for a parent to replace the entire team, right? And that's what a lot of parents are doing these days.
Right.
And I think in a way it might be better for a parent not to have such a detailed level of knowledge, about the deficits, and like not to become that clinician, but actually is to stay a parent. That's great,
Mhm.
because it is, as you said, very emotional, and it is very hard to stay in that, therapist role to your child when you are a mom to your child, and the child doesn't see you in the same way as they see their parents. So I think in some way, it's healthy for parents not to have that very detailed clinical knowledge, and not to look at the child as a clinical project, but just to be parent and be supportive and be knowledgeable, but also hand some pieces off to professionals, because I think it's a very high burnout situation when a parent becomes a therapist. At the same time, I think that, like I said, I think now is the golden age, because the schools have to rely on parents, and parents have to rely on schools. And I think that that trust, in many situations, I see it blossoming when, the teams and the families really get to know each other. I don't want to say intimately, but like in, much better on a human level, because they've been talking so much, they've been sharing so much detail, they've been working on so many things that require sort of very like micro level. And
Yeah.
I think that is something that's what we're going to take with us very much. And I hope that that's very helpful for moving forward. And I'm trying to remember the last point that you were making. um what was that, Rebecca, that you said the last thing? Is anyone listening?
um yeah, I mean, and please, like, open this up to the floor, because I know we are all from and different states and different backgrounds. So if something that we're saying is resonating, or you're thinking of something, I welcome you to chime in. Well, I don't remember the exact thing that I said. I think, to kind of sum up what we're getting at, is there's almost like a bedside manner that you need when you're approaching, right? We all like a doctor that is going to sit there and listen to us, and kind of value us as a person, not just an ailment. And I think there's certain times in education that we need to make sure that we're looking at the whole thing, and not just looking at the deficit, or looking at the thing that is getting in the way of the progress, or to put blame. I think we all sometimes, just as a human nature, we make assumptions. And I don't think that that is positive. And I think that, if anything, we've all gained a little bit of empathy in how hard it is to be isolated at home with a lot of things going on. And for so many in the disability community, that isolation was normal. So if not for anything else, we can look at the other side, and start to really build that bridge. And perhaps it's because we're going to, hopefully, something happens with the standardized tests. Like, we still need to have the data, but, like, are we really going to spend more time on social emotional, and where does that fit into academic progress, and those with disabilities as well? These are just things that have been on my mind. Because I know there's certain kids that, if their meeting is going to look a lot different this year than it did last year, because of the circumstances. And to really account for that, and to be, because then there's the legal part too, right? And I think that's where sometimes we feel the barrier, but I need to show that they're making the progress. I'm going to make it happen. Like, I know, as a teacher, I feel that way. And when I can't get a whole class or one kid to make the growth, there's this responsibility, right? Um, and so having the communication and understanding why the progress is not and being made, or, start to talk more less about what is not happening, and more about what is, right? let's talk about how some of the kids had to take on more um responsibilities. So maybe they're doing and really well in that regard, right? So I there's so many and different ways to kind of look at this, but I think there was a slide that you wanted to share about the developmental aspect.
Mm-hmm.
I would love
Yeah.
for you to share that.
Sure, I'm going to do that. I just wanted to say that I really appreciated what you said about sort of not blaming, because I think it's something that happens, both for parents and for the team. I hear it in meetings. I hear it when I speak to parents before the meeting. They'll say, oh, they're just not doing this, they're not doing that. And the team will say, oh, but the family is not doing this at home, they are not. It's because the family is not getting these services, or because the family is not doing X, Y, and Z. And when I prepare parents for the meeting, I always want to say, let's ask questions. We need to ask the team. I mean, this is what you think, this is how it comes across to you. Let's ask questions, let's find out. And I think it's such a good perspective for parents to come with respect to the team and with curiosity and open mind, which is to say, we have a concern, but we haven't made up our mind about where we should be on it. We have questions that we want to ask. And sometimes, I'll be honest, I come to the meeting, I will read an evaluation or a progress report, and I'll come feeling livid about something. I will always ask questions, and then sometimes I'll hear the answers and I'll say, oh, okay. Like, I totally get it now why this didn't happen.
Mhm.
So, on the other side, when I hear the team tell the parents, well, you are not doing X, Y, and Z, what I always do as an advocate, that's a little bit tongue in cheek, but I always say, I think what you're telling me is that you are asking the family how you need to support them so they can start doing those things. If you want this family to work on the child's vocabulary, then I think what you are telling me is that we're going to have a conversation about the kind of things you can send home, or the kind of information you can provide to the parents, or training so they can actually start doing this at home. And so I think you can always turn it positive, but it's better if it starts positive. As in, if something is not happening at home, then how can we help the parents? Because parents don't always come from a place of being informed, educated, because it's not their field,
Right.
not
And
because they like. And yeah, so it's just what I wanted to say. So I can share this slide. Let me find it. I clicked on the wrong thing.
I love that we actually have a student in the audience as well. So once we're done, I would love to hear some perspective from you, Maddie. Okay. All right.
So this is part of the presentation I did for parents. So it has a little bit of like a parent language in there, and it talks about your child, and but it's really applies here. And so what this slide talks about is, how do we think about IEP goals and objectives, right? When we come to an IEP meeting, an annual review, and we have to develop new goals and objectives, how do we choose? And so one thing I've already talked about it, and the presentation was about kids on the spectrum, so it has a lot of references, but it's the same for everyone, which is, it is not set in stone. And I cannot say this enough because it took me years to learn that. I used to just come and be like, here's me with my PhD and my expertise, and so I can tell you what your child needs. But it's actually something that was, my eyes were open during my doctoral training, and also I lived in 3 different countries. So you learn that people have different attitudes and different values and different perspectives, and they do things wildly differently, and kids still come out okay. And something I've learned also in my work, that sometimes I absolutely think this child should have one thing, and parents absolutely think that, they make a different choice. And of course, I support them. I'm an advocate, and it's their child, and they're the parents, so they make the decision. But then, because I follow families for years, so sometimes in a few years, I see that actually that was the right decision, because this family knows.
Mhm.
And so I think we need to keep that in mind. And, of course, schools provide research based interventions. And There's a psychologist in the Boston area. Her name is Karen Levine. She works a lot on anxiety, and she is an author of a couple of books. One of the books is how to choose interventions, how to match children with interventions. And one of the chapters is on research-based interventions. And what is amazing to me about what she wrote is she actually, as one of the criteria for an intervention being research-based, she put that the family has to support it. If the family doesn't support this intervention, it is not a research based intervention for that family, because what is research based is very contextualized. It is something that has to have been used with this kind of family and with this kind of child, in which if the family doesn't support it, then that intervention cannot be used. It's not going to be research based for them because it's our own context. And again, I think as professionals, we just really have to be very open to that. And as much as we can provide parents with information and educate them and explain our reasoning, still hearing what is the most important for them is good for the collaboration and the trust and relationship, but it's also, I think, clinically is very sound. It doesn't mean that we have to put everything in and the only things that have to be in the IEP are the parents' perspective, but I think it has to be in there because that's where the child is going to go home to at the end of school. So, where it says what is important to you, I would say what is important for the child, which is, again, I'm a developmental psychologist. So the picture here is how I think when I think about the goals and objectives. This is our child today, where the child is highlighted. What are the immediate needs today, right? What is on the child's plate? What is happening in a classroom? What is happening at home? What is happening in the community? We need to work on that for sure. But I also like to think about what has this child been working on in the past and what is the child's progress has been, because it's going to help us figure out where the child has been successful and where the child has struggled to make progress, and we might learn something from that and get that into the next IEP, maybe different methodology, maybe individual versus group, maybe a different communication style, whatever it is. And also what are the skills the child has already, and how are these skills are going to serve this child in the immediate situation. And also thinking about the future is very important, always. Which is what is going to come up in the next 2 to 3 years. And this is, I find, at least the IEP teams I speak with usually don't think that way. But especially for children with certain profiles, and I think for everyone, it takes time to gain skills. So, I can give an example of reading, for example, where that's very important, where, children learn how to read for the first 3 grades, and then in the fourth grade, it's reading to learn, right? Learning to read versus reading to learn. And so I start thinking about that in the first grade. Is my child I'm working with going to be ready for that switch? And if not, let's get those skills in now. Academic demands go up. There's more sort of sitting still over the years. So I start thinking very early on, how is this child sitting? How is the postural control? How are the core muscles? Are we expecting this child to be able to progressively sit more and more and more? And of course, we can accommodate, but can we start now doing some OT or PT exercises where the child is going to get built up and get ready for those demands? Sorry, my mouse is very sensitive and keeps. Um, yeah, and one thing that I guess highlighted here is puberty,
Absolutely.
which, yes, is it's a huge developmental transition, and it sort of gets ignored a lot of times by the IEP teams and also by parents, because no one wants to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. The sex and health education for children with disabilities is very important. It is very important to start it early. It's very important to have all appropriate topics covered. It's very important that it's specialized, even if the child is in inclusion. A lot of times you still have to do it in a specialized way, and parents don't want to talk about it because it's just not fun to talk about for them and the teams, really. and teams don't have the resources. And so it's something that I've really become very aware of in the past few years. So I put it in here because I bring it to every IEP conversation now, probably starting at 9, 10, 11. I check in with the parents and we talk about it. And you can really do a lot at school, and you can also divide the work with the parents and provide resources and consultation where it's going to help everyone in terms of safety, in terms of boundaries, in terms of physical space for that child as they grow up. So these are the things we have already talked about. The don't drop goals. I think this is very important, and I see that in schools a lot. And I've been reviewing IEPs nationwide, and I see that a lot. You have a goal on an IEP. At the end of the year, that goal is not met, and on the next IEP, that goal is not there. So what happened to that goal? Assuming it was an important skill, and now the child is just working on the next thing, but they don't have what comes before. And again, as a developmental psychologist, when I work on IEPs, I think about the developmental progression and putting the foundational skills in. So when you have that foundational skill, then you can go to the next skill. So if you worked on this foundational skill for a while and you didn't quite get there, and you said, okay, forget about this one, let's just move on, it's not going to serve the child well. It's not
I'm
going to work.
curious,
Yeah.
has that always been a situation, or did that come about because of Common Core and needing to get the curriculum-based standards? And I wonder how the one thing has affected the other.
I don't know because, of course, the goals are not always academic. A lot of times they
Right.
can be social,
Sure.
occupational therapy. I think that I don't know the terminologies in other states. I think it's the same terminology. I think the crux of the issue is whether or not the child has a modified curriculum, right? Because if the
Right.
curriculum is not modified, you have to move this child forward, right, with the grade requirements. I would say if the child cannot move forward with the grade requirements, if that progress is not happening, it might be the case for modified curriculum. And then you sort of limit the content that you present. I mean, it's a very sensitive decision and to be done with care, but I don't think it's a reason to just drop
Yeah.
goals, because even academically, in terms of math, for example, if you don't have certain goals met, you can't
Foundational.
move forward with reading. If you don't have the coding automatically, you are not going to get to that reading comprehension in fifth and sixth and seventh grade, right? I see some heads nodding, I think. So you
Because
know I
it's
think it's where the legal versus
yeah,
clinical versus developmental sort of hits that intersection. You can't sacrifice the clinical for the legal. You
yeah.
have to have an honest conversation, and I think that parents do appreciate those conversations when they're fully clued in to all the implications. um, and you have to think about what's going to serve the child the best. And I understand that the school has procedures and obligations, but I think this is where curriculum modification might, and you don't have to modify it across the board. You can modify it in one area that is particularly challenging to the child. And there are actually ways also to keep sort of the doors open for when a child catches up, like in reading. You can do audiobooks, so the child is working on actual decoding skills at the lower level, grade level, but listening to books at the higher grade level. And you are introducing certain concepts like background knowledge and semantics,
Absolutely.
and print concepts at that grade level. So the child catches up, they will have those in place. So
But I just want to give you a compliment for this. This is one of many graphics that she has created, and I'm just going to share quickly, because one of the things that you touched upon is is it, yeah, it's up, is the fact that we need to talk about sex education. And it's actually one of her posts. So all of these are created, they're research based, they are pretty, but they're packed with information. And this is all from um, what she does. And what I love is not just the graphic, but the comments. One, very well explained, but the amount of people that follow you, a lot of them are children and adults who are dealing with these things,
Right.
and how you speak to them and you're able to say like, this is okay, like this is what it looks like. And I think there was one that really spoke to me, that we think of autism spectrum. It's either severe or it's mild. But there is a ton of things underneath that umbrella. Are we talking about sensory needs? Are we talking about, what that looks like academically? It's not, where is it? I love this. This is like one of my favorite ones so far.
Thank you.
Um,
It's not my idea, I have to say.
It's so
Actually,
true. There's
yeah,
so much more. It could be high here and low here, or high here and low here,
right.
with the memory, the motor. It's not just one thing.
Oh my gosh, I have 2,300 likes on that one. I had no idea.
Yes. No,
Amazing.
I mean, it's amazing. And what, you put this out December 29th. And just the information is, to normalize it, I think, is amazing.
Yeah.
And right now it's all about graphics and quick in information. The next thing we need to do is get a TikTok and go,
Well, there are
so
a lot of TikToks actually in the very
educate.
special education topics.
Yeah, really?
Yes.
I'm not there yet. I just got started on like Clubhouse, so one thing at a
Yeah,
time.
I'm sticking to the images.
Very good. So we do have about 10 minutes
Okay.
left. Does anybody have immediate questions or things that they would like to share while we're here together tonight? Maddie, and what do you think about all this? Does this sound like something that you experienced?
Yes, I have experience in IEPs. But this year I didn't get to experience in my IEP because of the everybody graduating differently and the COVID, so I didn't get to do my IEP virtually, which kind of sucked. but but at least I got to like attend to the other ones that I have been doing.
Do you feel like the people on the team saw you in a big lens, that it wasn't just about your grades, that it was about your whole person?
Yeah.
That's great. Um, so thank you for and being here tonight. I really appreciate it. Maddie was one of the superstars from last week. So I'm grateful that you decided to come back. So strategies when they are in an IEP meeting. Charlene, are you coming from a parent perspective, a teacher, a therapist, a parent?
Parent. Okay. I will say that I have a webinar on my website about sort of acing an IEP meeting. It's an hour long. It's pretty, but it's broken down. So if you are, curious to hear more, that webinar is on my website and it's available. It's free. But it has a lot of answers to that question. I think one of the main strategies I think one of the main strategies is not to feel embarrassed or ashamed to ask questions. I think a lot of parents come to a meeting and they feel like they should know everything and they should understand what the team is saying. The team usually uses a lot of abbreviations and jargon, professional jargon. And even, after having done this for 10 years, sometimes I have to stop them and ask, can you please tell me what you mean? What is this? And what I do all the time, probably every 5 minutes, is I turn to the parents and I'll say, do you understand that? Does that make sense to you? Do you know what this means? Do you know this test? Do you know what kind of evaluation we're talking about? So I take that tone, but it is absolutely fine to ask questions.
And also, you're allowed to ask questions after the fact.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
You have, what is it, 15 days?
It depends on the state.
It's
It
it's
depends. It depends on the state. Yes, but you
that's
should
something that,
absolutely understand
yeah.
what is being said in a meeting
Yeah.
and ask questions and expect your questions to be answered. I think having, benefit of the doubt is very important, and I think that having faith and coming in good faith and expecting good faith is very important. I think especially for families who have been negotiating with the school for a very long time, and it's not the first meeting where they're addressing something that is disputed, is still, if you come and you don't believe that anything good can be happening in this meeting where things can be resolved, you really will not resolve anything. I know it's exceptionally difficult to put yourself in that space. Another strategy is to always be moving, looking forward. I think that's very important strategy because you might have a history with that team. It might not be such a great history, and you might be tempted to sort of bring it up and say, look, you've already talked to me about this. I've been talking to you about this for many, many years. We don't see eye to eye on this. You've said this, you didn't do that. You did this wrong. It's very emotional for parents, and it's sort of natural place to go. And I think it's fine to say a little bit about that history. You can't just like sweep it under the rug, but I think it's very important to be very forward looking. And so you can say, we've had a lot of disagreements about this, and we had some conversations that didn't go well. So I hope today we're going to come to a resolution. And these are my ideas for today. Let's see if we can move this forward. You just cannot sort of, if you have resentments, if you have those kind of unresolved conflicts, emotions that are very heavy, I would say try to resolve them outside of the meeting and come to this meeting, which is always too short, prepare to say things that will help you move your IEP forward and
Yeah.
create progress in that regard. And I'm saying that with the highest respect for parents because it is really, really hard to do, but
And
it's the only way.
I also think it's important. A lot of times parents don't realize they're integral members of the team. And equal members of the team. And so a lot of parents don't realize that. I'm also an educational consultant in Massachusetts, so we'll have to
I
talk.
am.
Um,
Yes.
but a lot of them really don't realize that, and so they think that they're coming to meet with the experts. Well, quite frankly, nobody is a bigger expert on the child than they are. So everybody has a different area of expertise. They're their expert on the child as a parent. Everybody has a different role, and everybody has a different um, area in which they shine, and so that's why there are different people at the meeting. And so I think that's really important to stress. And there's nothing wrong with saying I don't know the answer to that, or I need some time to think about that. And I think it's also fine important for parents to realize that nothing is written in stone. They're not committing to anything at the meeting. The only thing that they have to sign at the meeting is the attendance sheet, and whether or not, well, now they don't have to sign anything because it's virtual, but whether or not they accept, if it's an eligibility meeting, whether or not they accept the evaluations. Other than that, they're not committing to anything. And I think that's really reassuring for parents to know that in advance, because sometimes it's sort of intimidating, is thinking, oh my God, I'm going to make these decisions. And what if I don't know if I'm going to understand it right away, or what if I want to think about it and not change my mind? It's nice to know that you can do that. And I think that reduces some anxiety knowing that in advance.
I agree, and I think it's part of the bedside manner, that Rebecca was talking about, because a lot of times what happens at the IEP table is when there is a discussion, a team chair will say, well, the team doesn't feel that way. The team feels that the
Right.
child doesn't need this. And that sort of sets the parents outside of the team. So I think this is a bedside manner issue where it would be great. And many, many, many teams do that. But I'm actually looking at the chat, and I guess the question was more about the accommodations. And I just want to say that accommodations you can have any accommodation in the world, in your child's IEP that this child needs. That's reasonable. It's very hard to say what accommodations your child might need without knowing a child's situation and also the classroom. So Yeah, exactly. It depends on the child. And so I would say if you are thinking about ideas for accommodations, you can actually Google them and just say accommodations ideas for X, and you can have a lot of different ideas. Just think about what works for your child at home, because those kind of things might also work for your child at school. And I think as a parent, you're uniquely situated to figure out accommodations for your child. Ask the team in a meeting, um, if they're talking about behaviors, they're talking about challenges your child is having, exactly what the situation is, and think about what it might be helpful for your child. What is the reason for the challenge? And is there anything that can be changed in the environment that would make it easier? And there are a lot of very creative solutions, but they're just like thousands of them.
So I think what we can do is that we'll give some time once we're not recording for people to
Okay.
ask specific
Sure.
questions. I think that may be a little bit helpful for those in the room. So I do want to wrap up. One of the things that came to mind was this book, From Emotions to Advocacy. Um, it is the Pete and Pam Wright, which I feel like are the special ed, like the go-to when it comes to a law. What I really like is that it's giving some of the kind of the history and the background. And I think that as a parent, it's really important to kind of just know a little bit about what it's all about. And so I know someone mentioned it in the chat, but every state has a parent advocacy network. And I've actually gone to some of the webinars just since everything is remote. And, it's not just general information. They will talk specifically to you about your child to help prepare you. So, there's things out there you don't always have to feel like, okay, my kid has a special need. Now I have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to help me get him or her what they need. Um, and I think that has kind of been something that when a team sees an advocate, everybody kind of, okay, what's going to happen? And that's not necessarily the case. I think that parents deserve to have the people there that they want there to support them, because it is emotional. I know I would just want like someone to hold my hand, because when they're talking about your kid, it's just a different feeling, and I've been on both sides now, and it's given me such a deeper appreciation, and I feel like we all need to go through like some sort of empathy training to realize what it feels like. There was a great webinar last night that I'm gonna try to post on the Learning Revolution site, but it was just talking about empathy in an IEP meeting. And what I realized is it's just teaching people how to be human. I think sometimes we forget that we're all human and everybody makes mistakes and we're there to help each other. So it was interesting because it was kind of odd that some of the things had to be said. Like, that's just being a human, isn't it? Being kind and smiling during a meeting. I'm confused. But these are things that, if they're not explicitly said, it creates a certain environment, a culture, a feeling. When you walk into certain buildings, there's a vibe. And I think that parents, depending on if they're meeting in a conference room or an office with 12 chairs and you're on top of one another and nice to meet you, I think the virtual world might help because people can connect from their comfort of their own space. And I think hopefully some of those tensions we can actually get to the core, that we're there for the individual, and we're a support team, and you should leave going woohoo, high five, like it should feel like that. And that's not always the case, but it could be the goal. um So I guess if there is anything, last words that you just kind of want to wrap up before I get into some of the more businessy things on my side. Still there? So I feel like we hit all the points. I welcome you to take a look. She also has an amazing website that has the blog, the contact. I really just think you're coming from it from such a research base, and I really appreciate that. Definitely take a look at the Instagram. It's the expert ally. And I'll also put a little plug in for myself because I'm starting to learn how to do all this at Educator Muller. But a few other things, because everybody's all about collaboration. If you haven't been on Clubhouse, there's some really interesting, innovative groups that are talking about how they want to change education. And if you're interested, I do have 2 invites because it's in the beta stage and it's invite only, which sounds exclusive, but really it started from like a business standpoint, and like now there's this education group that is growing. I've been on some amazing talks and connecting with just the disability networks are incredible, to talk to people who have lived and breathed the whole thing. And I'll explain more if you are interested, but it's a very interesting platform. The other thing that is also in the alpha version is something called K20. It's like a Facebook, but for educators specifically on the global side of things. So by being here tonight, I do want to put this in the chat. This is a welcome. I found out about this through someone that I met on Clubhouse. So this is a very neat space that if you're interested in just having one more thing to check or one more email to receive, that is available to you. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that I am working on trying to get everything in one place. So educatormuller.org will be coming soon. But I welcome you to go to the actual site right now, just for the pure reason to have easy access to the YouTube links, as well as the links to my Instagram and anything else. Anybody that has been on, I try to follow them and kind of share things out so that everybody's just kind of in this space of collaboration. So I welcome you to join in any way possible, and I appreciate you coming along for the ride. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And hopefully we'll see you next week.
Thank you.